Welcome to the General Resonance Theory YouTube channel. Today, we have a discussion on the electrophysiology of sleep consciousness with Dr. J.F. Pagel.
My background's a bit different in that I come from the field of basically of sleep and dream, which is something that I've been involved with for almost 50 years now. And my original work was in electrophysiology of Rem sleep in mice. So I spent some time working with animal models before going into clinical work, basically in sleep. I do have an interest in what some of you talked about. I've got a book out there called Machine Dreaming and Consciousness. And I've also done some work with creativity and dream use, mainly in filmmaking. So you may have run across my name at some point there. But all of my work has been based, and it's 150 plus papers and 9 books now on this concept of functional electrophysiology in the brain. And so what I've been talking about for several years now has been about the different electrophysiology associated with sleep. Integrating the electrical fields with states of sleep consciousness, basically stating that sleep consciousness, the various forms of it phenomenologically, are associated with specific EEG brain rhythms. Now, one of the questions and I run into this with neuroscience all the time, because a lot of people don't have a concept of sleep and dreams, or the association of dream states, or what actually a dream is. And at some points, we worked with trying to come up with a construct, a definition of dreaming that can be shared across specialties. And basically, what we talk about dreaming, we're talking about 3 different characteristics. One, it's a state that occurs somewhere in sleep or wake. 2, it can be reported or not reported. And 3, it has a form of content, and that content varies. It's not necessarily your bizarre hallucinatory psychoanalytic dream. It can be just an awareness that you have been dreaming. And so we put this paper out in 2000 and been trying to get people to basically identify what form of dream they're talking about when they give a presentation or write about dreaming. What we have been talking about, or with the lab, has been talking about the association of electrophysiologic states with different types of dream. And one thing I would like to ask you today is to get involved with this to some degree, because almost everyone dreams. I did a study a few years back with non-dreamers, with individuals who never ever have experienced a dream. And they're rare. There is about 10% of a sleep lab population will say they don't dream, but the number that, when you actually ask them, call them up, interview them, only the very rare individual will have never ever experienced a dream. It took me 5 years to collect somewhere like 16 people, and who had never ever experienced a dream. So that's 0.17% of the population. And we woke those people up all through the night in all different stages and never got a dream from a single one of them. We did compare that to a group that we called rare dreamers, where the mean latency to the last dream was 17 years. But so these are people who occasionally had dreamed as a child or went away, or had a rare nightmare. And surprisingly, the 16 of those folks that we woke up, we got two dreams. Or, well, we got one guy that woke up and he was aware that he may have dreamed. And we got one guy that we woke up, and he was walking along the left bank in Paris in the nude, but he swore it wasn't a dream. So those are what you run into with looking at dreams. in let's see here. How do I go to my next slide? Okay, here we are. This is something I did, and this is not true research, but this is something that any of you could do as well, just to get a sense of what I'm talking about. A couple of years ago, I had an illness that involved me waking up and having to go to the bathroom multiple times during the night. I'm sure none of the men in the room have ever had that experience, or the women either. But what I decided to do is to be a real pronoid about it and use it in a way to try to determine for myself how often I was dreaming. You know, I tend to be fairly lazy writing things down, so I just put a grid by the bed, and I would, if I woke up and I was dreaming or had a thought in my head, I would mark it down. So this is 7 days of my own content. It includes 6 wakings, almost 6 wakings a night. And for me, and I know I study sleep and dreams, but I'm not a intense dreamer by any means. There was content in my brain, in my thoughts, every time I woke up, except the night that I took a pain medication and I wasn't sure I slept at all. And there was a nightmare that I did a lucid control thing with and changed the story. And the next morning, I had recall I actually had recall 3 nights, which is kind of average. Most of us will report 2 to 3 dreams a week that we recall in the morning. So I'm not that unusual. The ones that I did remember were long story type dreams or the nightmares. And at least twice when I woke, I had what's called white dreams. I had awareness that I had been dreaming, but no content. So this kind of fit with where I'd been going for a long time. Is the question of, is there a time that we wake up at night that we're not dreaming? Now, if you look at the studies, non-dreaming happens at sleep onset 20% of the time. So 80% of the time you wake someone up right after they've fallen asleep, you'll get a dream. Same thing in REMs, it's 80% of the time. In light sleep stage 2 or in deep sleep, you'll get a dream report about 40% of the time. So pretty much what you're getting during sleep is you'll get a report of mental content going on in the brain. And that mental content, and that's what I'll talk about today, varies based on the sleep stage and the electrophysiologic basis of that sleep stage, because that's how we determine what a sleep stage is.
Jim, can I interrupt with a quick question there? Is it possible that people are accessing the last sort of conscious experience that they had and that wasn't necessarily taking place at the moment that they were waking up? I could imagine if there was just like no activity, that you just project back to the last time you were dreaming.
There are patterns that affect recall tendencies. One's significance of the dream, how bizarre it is, how intense it is, whether it has effect on your psyche, which is more likely to be found with a REM dream than it is with a day reflective level 2. And you'll also get, and I had one of those in here, where you get a repeated dream that starts in one REM period and comes up in another. But almost invariably, the ones that are remembered in the morning, when I woke with these in the morning, I knew content, but I didn't write the content down. And when I woke up in the morning, I didn't remember the content in general from the wakings during the night. So the power of the dream on recall in the morning is very rarely the last dream. It can be the last dream, but it's definitely the most powerful dream that has a resonance with you.
Thank you.
Nikki, go ahead.
I had heard that I had heard that if you wake up during non-REM, it's more difficult to remember your dreams. But if you wake up during REM, then it's easier with the recall. Does that sound consistent with what you found?
That to some degree is true. It's true that if you wake up in REMs, you're more likely to recall a dream than you are in stage 2 or deep sleep. Sleep
Cool.
onset is a different bear. And if you wake up right after you fall asleep, your recall is going to be quite high then as well.
Gotcha. Cool.
I have a quick question, and maybe
Okay.
you'll answer this with the rest of the talk. I was wondering, what do you think is happening with people who are not dreaming or not reporting dreaming?
Well, that's a really kind of fun question. I mean, one of the theories has been, I mean, it's a very low percentage of people who have no recall. If there was something wrong with the neurocognitive processing of these individuals, dreaming basically, as near as we understand, uses the same systems that we use during waking. So you should be able to find some sort of dysfunction in waking performance in someone who can't remember a dream if it's based on the cognitive processing ability of the individual. And of our non-dreamers, you know, we didn't do MRIs on them, and we didn't do full psychological testing, but they were as likely to have a job as people who were other. One was a math professor, and the one difference that we did find, which is kind of fun from some of your background, is that the individuals who didn't dream, we did an assessment of level of creative interest, and their level, none of them really had a creative process. In part, that's about we knew that with our in our dream use studies, and that if someone has a creative process, they're much more likely to use their dreams than someone who's not interested in creative process. Now, the really fun one has been the theory that the difference between Homo sapiens and Homo Neanderthal has to do with dreaming, and that what happened in 30,000 years ago in the caves of South France is when you had Homo sapiens come in, and suddenly you had these beautiful artworks put on the wall that perhaps were derived from dream. They were put on the wall in deep, dark holes in the ground, involved with spirituality and shamanism, and perhaps the idea is that the Neanderthal did not actually have dreaming, and the remnants of that approach to reality still exist in our structure, so that some of us don't need to dream and don't dream. It's quite clear that you can perform well in our society without dreaming. Is that enough? Okay, well, let's go on, and because this is stage 1, because stage 1 sleep onset is a stage that's defined by the presence of alpha. Now, alpha rhythm, you know, it's what overwhelms the waking EEG, 10 cycles a second, Berger's original rhythm, and almost everyone has good alpha, and the onset of sleep is defined by alpha dropout. So the only way that we electrophysiologically define sleep onset is we go from we go to a point where alpha is less than 50% of the page. So there's not a on off with sleep wake as far as electrophysiology, but stage 1 is definitely an alpha state, and stage 1 is a very different dreaming stage. I know some of you talked about meditating, and one of my great experiences with meditating is to go up to the Zendo at 5:30 in the morning and sit down, because you have these wonderful little sleep onset visions. You fall asleep and you have it doesn't have the content of a long dream. You have an intense visually active experience. One of mine was looking out. I'm on the beach of Kauai, looking out over the ocean, and what I see is like hundreds or more wave tops going into the future. So I'm looking into the ocean from above. So there's no story, it's just a visual. Now, a lot of people will have hallucinations at sleep onset. This is a very real state. Things seem very real. People with narcolepsy clearly have hypnagogic hallucinations all the time, but about half of us have hypnagogic hallucinations at sleep onset at some point in our lives. In fact,
Jim, is a night terror a type of hypnagogic hallucination?
no,
Okay.
it's a deep sleep event. The hypnagogic hallucination is right at sleep onset. It's very real, and you're right at the edge of wakefulness. It doesn't last for very long. It has minimal stories. It can be incredibly frightening. Jones' original description of a nightmare was a sleep onset version of a succubus sucking the soul out of the mouth of the dreamer. And that was at sleep onset. So it can be very, very intense, particularly in supposedly narcolepsy gives you weirder and wilder sleep onset dreams than any other state. The other time that this occurs, and most of us will have experienced it, if you drive at night on the highway and you have you're trying to stay awake and you drop off, and you'll see things in the road. That's my one extraterrestrial event that I saw, a giant white light settling down on the road. Of course, I was in the middle of the night and it just happened for a moment, but that can be the kind of hypnagogic hallucination you have at sleep onset, and that's an alpha associated dream. When we look at what's happening in the brain during sleep onset, what you find is that many of the visual aspects, particularly the posterior brain, are still active in stage one. Your brain hasn't fully turned off, and visual systems of waking are still operative. So you get this intense, it's the state at which you get the most intense visual awareness. This has been used by Salvador Dali, was kind of famous. He would do this deal where he would sit in a chair holding a quarter or a coin. He was in Spain. I'm not sure what they were called at that time, but you would sit in the chair until you fell asleep, and you would get when the motor muscles relax, you would drop that coin into a pan and it would wake you up. And Dali would paint the images, and that's some of his most intense images are from this inducing a sleep onset alpha dream. Questions? Stage two is where we spend most of our sleep. This is the next stage you go to. And it's quite interesting electrophysiologically because it's sigma. It's 15 cycles a second. And we have thousands of these through the night, these events that you're seeing in the middle of the screen there. And it is a higher frequency event. In waking, and I'm sure you even know more about waking sigma than I do, it has been associated in mice at least with positioning in space. It may be an organization factor in the hippocampus, a phrasing event with neurodynamics. The dreams of stage two are pretty boring. They tend to be day reflective. They tend to be what you've experienced during the day. They can be frightening. People with panic attacks in waking will have panic attacks during stage two. So those brief moments of terror can occur in stage two. There's been the theory that the dreams that occur in stage two reflect the memory consolidation that's happening with stage 2, because our best data for the consolidation of memory from short term moving it into long term is stage 2 sleep. In fact, if you look at which stage of sleep we require for consolidating memory, it's not REMS, it's not deep sleep, it's stage 2. So if you deprive people of light sleep, they will have more difficulty integrating new knowledge for test performance.
Jim, a question on terminology. Can you explain the term spindle, and also in this case, why 12 to 15 hertz wouldn't be just alpha? Why is
Well,
it?
yeah, the cycling speed, you know, alpha is a very solid set in at least the human and most animals at 10 to 11 cycles a second. It's really congruent. Sigma at 15 cycles a second occurs with these pattern bursts, and they're always in the 15 to 16 cycle a second range. They don't come slower, they don't come faster. They can occur in deep sleep as well. They're almost always seen in non-REM sleep, and they happen in these bursts. Now, as most of you know with electrophysiology, the more rapid rate you have, the shorter level of activity you have. And so we don't see runs, we see huge runs of delta 1 cycle a second, and we'll see these big runs on sleep onset of alpha at 10 cycles a second. But anything higher than that at higher frequency will come in a short burst that will be consumed within the rest of the EEG fairly quickly. The other event that occurs in stage 2 is called a K complex, which is a spike wave activity. Those and spindles you can induce in the EEG, even though perception is fairly solidly shut down in sleep. It's basically our behavioral definition of what sleep is. Calling someone's name when they're in stage 2, you can induce spindles and K complexes.
So just to make sure I understand what you're saying, so in waking states, alpha would generally include this sigma range, but you're saying in sleep states, it's a kind of a distinct phenomenon?
No, it's a different, I think it's a different stage. In waking, you don't tend to see, in humans, you don't tend to see sigma during waking. You might pick it up on a quantitative EEG analysis, but it wouldn't consume segments of the EEG like it does in sleep.
Thanks. And then could you explain the term spindle? Why is it different for sleeping states rather than waking states?
You probably got me there. Someone else may have a better answer. The spindles that I've seen described in waking states, such as sigma spindles, are seen in animal models, and generally what I've seen.
Got it.
Never seen it in humans. That's the big difference, of course, between humans and animal studies, is that in human studies, we're using scalp EEGs. And in animal studies, we're using intrathecal systems where we've got electrodes placed within the brain in our animal models. So we're getting a very different reading in an animal than we are in a human.
To comment on the spindles, yeah, I think they're slightly higher frequency than traditional alpha, and they come in quicker bursts versus a lot of the like posterior alpha rhythm is more sustained, still somewhat transient, but the spindles definitely have like canonical waveform patterns, and they tend to be briefer.
They're brief events. Yeah, that's my take on it, and I'd have to look up the exact definition of how long a spindle is, but it's a second or two, or maybe 3 seconds max in length.
Great, thank you.
Now, REMS is an interesting state, and many people, and it was accepted for a long time that REM sleep was dreaming sleep. And this was all based on the original discovery of REM sleep, which was after all the stages of non-REM sleep had been discovered. And it was Dement's and Ezerinsky's lab. And they woke a guy up whose eyes were moving back and forth in a conjugate manner. That's the upper two, that's an EOG report where you have the conjugate eye movement. And the individual reported a dream, and they did a visual of this as far as a video and kind of put it out there. And over the last 50 or 60 years, it just became like religion that REM sleep was dreaming sleep. And that was the basis for it. And from the first, we knew that people were reporting dreams from all other stages of sleep, but it kind of overwhelmed not only the field, but everyone outside the field who writes on REMs or writes on dreaming really equates the two. And it's only been in the last few years that you've been able to get people to say, no, not all the time, or maybe most dreams occur in REMs is the line that I get a lot now. But the thing that happens in REMs because of the scalp electrodes is you don't get any conveyance of synchronous electrical fields. It looks like wake. The EEG is rapid. It's non-synchronous. It has no waveforms that you see. Now, this and people went around calling it for years, and people still call it paradoxical sleep or non-synchronous sleep, where if you this is what REM sleep looks like in a mouse. And this is my, some of my original work. We're going back to where before most of you were born when I was doing this. And REM sleep is a wonderful synchronous event of theta in a mouse. You see these beautiful runs of the most synchronous fields you will ever see in an animal model. And I'm sure some of you see that if you work with animals. And if you're looking at the lower line there and you're looking at quantitative analysis, you'll get spiking at the theta frequency, which is 7 to 8. And you'll get also, we'll talk about later, you also get gamma in REMs as well, which you don't see either of these waves in the scalp recording on a human. Here's, but if you take a human and you get this rare situation where you can put electrodes inside the brain, and these are basically studies that we have done. I haven't done these, but labs that do surgery for seizure disorders will often implant electrodes in the brain and leave them there. And this is a NIH study which compiled data from multiple studies of intrathecal electrodes in humans. And it turns out that in the human, REMs is an incredibly synchronous state. You have hippocampal theta just kicking off on a quantitative EEG analysis. You have a huge amount of theta happening on the left side of the power grid there. And in the middle, you'll see that you have the gamma frequency as well, between 20 and 30 hertz. And it's apparent, the bars on the right there are looking at the number of electrodes that pick this up, and almost all the electrodes that you put intrathecally in a human will pick up theta waves. Now, here's the kind of wonderful question that I have, and I'll just bring for any of you, is why theta does not go to the scalp electrodes. And that's a very interesting question. And it to me is the most paradoxical thing about REMs anymore. We've dropped the association of REMs with dreaming. That's not paradoxical. It's not non-synchronous. It's not a wake-like state. That's not paradoxical anymore. But why does this frequency that's basically, it's not as high a frequency as sigma. You've got sigma, which shouldn't convey nearly as far that you can pick up in a scalp electrode. And why shouldn't a propagated field that you can pick up throughout the CNS from putting an electrode in the brain and find it, why are you not picking it up on brain scalp electrodes.
Hey,
So,
Jim,
yeah,
a question.
volunteer ideas.
Yeah, a question and a comment. You said gamma, but did you mean beta? Because the slide is showing
We
beta.
refer to them basically at the same, yeah.
Okay, so you're okay, okay. And then in terms of your question about hippocampal theta, I emailed you a bit before, to talk today about the role of temperature and circadian rhythms in coupling and decoupling. And I'm curious what you think of the idea that temperature differences in the brain and body may be kind of the underlying mechanism driving these decoupling and waking and sleeping cycles. Is there any data showing a temperature difference in the hippocampus during these states where it doesn't actually, the hippocampal theta does not reach the cortex?
I don't know. You brought this up this morning, and I don't know about any temperature difference in the hippocampus. I know that in REMS is where you have a dropout of temperature control in the body. And so there's been multiple studies that in REM sleep, people's ability to control their body temperature declines, which is fairly stable during non-REM stages. It disappears in REMs. Now, whether that happens in the hippocampus as well, it should probably, it should be the same change in central control of temperature. But it also affects heart rate variability, autonomic discharge, sympathetic discharge. All of these change differently in REMs than they do in the other states.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how that would affect the propagation of the waveform.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of thinking out loud again here. So in terms of coupling and the functional role of oscillatory coupling, and dream states, I think, being characterized in particular by the loss of motor control, right? Is there much evidence showing this decoupling between hippocampal theta and motor control centers? Is that kind of accepted as being a key part of the transition to a sleep state?
Well, there is some of that, but there's also an illness it's called REM behavior disorder that we've studied intensely, that in which older males, mainly, or people with Parkinson's disease or other neurologic disease, lose this motor block and start to act out their dreams. Now, it's a question of whether they're actually acting out their dreams, because it's not a one-to-one. It's not like you dream you're running and your legs move, but about half the people who have REM behavior disorder will actually report a dream, and their body movements will reflect that dream to some extent. So there is loss. There's something that happens in a degenerated brain in an old man that results in a loss of the motor block. So there is something that can be explored along that line. Now, one of the theories I've had run by me as an idea is that what happens with these electrical fields, and the reason that you're seeing alpha and delta and even sigma on the EEG is that what you're looking is a production of these fields in the cortical pyramidal neurons. And these fields that are produced in the hippocampal pyramidal cells are for some reason not propagated like those in the cortical neurons. And that is one way of looking at it. Some people have said that that the cortical neurons are aligned through the multiple layers of the cortex to direct outside the brain into space, where in the hippocampus, they're not directed in the same direction. However, these fields, that doesn't really fly a lot for me, because most of these fields are fairly well propagated. I mean, it's hard to stop a frequency-based field from projecting. In other words, what is there about this field or about what's happening in the hippocampus that you can't find it further out? And I think there's a lot of questions. One of the things you do in the lab, where we end up doing EEGs is to determine whether people are alive or dead. And one of the ways we do that is by doing EEGs on people in ICU. Well, the problem is that in ICU, there's a ton of electronic equipment going on, and it's all running at 60 cycle. And so what we do is we put these blocks, these notch blockers on our systems, which take out 60 cycles. That also takes out, tends to take out beta and gamma as well. So we don't see any of the frequency that people are associating with quote unquote consciousness of gamma or beta, because we put a block not to see it, and people were trying to determine whether they're alive or dead. There's got to be some way that we are able to fend off electrical fields in our environment, that they don't affect us. And so there's something about our interaction with the electrical fields outside us and our projection from us into it, that there is some sort of blocking system going on. And it's I find that interesting, because I don't understand it at all.
One more comment there, Jim, and I'll be quiet. Could it be just this basic role of synchrony in terms of those, rhythms being there, but if they're not syncing up, then of course is limited information transfer between those parts of the brain that would otherwise, if they were coupled and therefore synchronous, they would actually be communicating and functionally connected?
Yeah, I like the paper you sent me about the coupling and the global nature with rhythms in the rest of the system, with breathing, with heart rate, etc. That these being segments of the same frequency. The frequencies in sleep are not coupled, and as near as we can understand, they don't couple with each other, and so you won't get sigma intermeshing. You'll get it disappearing, but you won't getting it synchronistically coupling with delta or theta or gamma. These seem to be independent rhythms during sleep, and so I'm not sure that would affect. It's possible that if you have theta at 8 cycles a second, there's something that would block it by taking it into another rhythm. But what you're getting on the EEG is you're getting something that doesn't look like a rhythm at all. The rhythm just disappears by the time it gets to the scalp. Okay, we'll go on. Maybe somebody will solve this problem for me at some point.
Hey, Jim, maybe I'll make a quick comment. Yeah, I'm having like the same struggle right now, where I've always done EEG studies, and I'm analyzing a like intracranial data set right now. And it's bizarre because there's such a prominent like response to the task, where I'm so used to like pick any scalp electrode, you see the same pattern. And then you go dive into all these electrodes in the brain, and it's like 1 out of 40 electrodes will show like any pattern that makes any sense with the task, versus on the scalp, it's just clear as day anywhere you look. So yeah, I don't know. I've run into the similar thing where, yeah, I think the signals just are so much more localized than we realize. And maybe, yeah, I don't know, maybe the scalp is conducting electricity in a weird way where it picks up on these macro oscillations. But yeah, it's just, it is weird because it doesn't seem to make sense in the simple way that I would expect it to, but.
Well, here's an idea for you to try at some point. I did this at one time, is I put electrodes all over the body, and I picked up alpha like in the lower back. So what do you do with that? I mean, it could be that you're getting a resonance from the spinal fluid or the activity at different levels, but there's significant broadcast coming on from like an alpha frequency from the CNS that extends quite a distance. It just doesn't go away. And if you have a resonant system like the human body, I mean, for instance, the EKG is a huge problem. We use blocks to keep it out of the EEG because we get these spikes from the heart rate going on and on and on. The respiratory drivers will do the same thing. So you have to take these small electrical systems that are very localized, like the pacemaker for the heart, and block it out of your brain system. So this whole electrical system of the body, I think we're looking at only a tip of what is there.
Maria, go ahead. You had a comment?
Yeah, I commented in the side box as well. Yeah, I mean, the CSF is salt water. So if you think about taking like a electrically complex device and putting it inside of salt water and then putting your electrode like outside of the salt water on top of the salt water, you're going to see a lot of averaging of signals. You're going to see a lot of modulation of the data. You're also going to see shunting happening. So it kind of makes sense to me if you just think about it from that aspect. Like we're still getting information, but it is heavily modulated by the CSF. Also just as a side note, it's really interesting to me how electricity plays a role in development, and it must, because the coating that fetuses are covered with and they're in utero, they have this like oily covering all over them, and part of it is protecting their skin against the water that they're floating in, but that coating is completely electrically insulative. So this is why we cannot get a heartbeat on a baby. You have to do it with ultrasound. You cannot do it with electrodes. And during birth, if they ever want to monitor the baby, they actually have to put a little corkscrew, like a needle electrode in the scalp of the baby as soon as it pops out of the cervix a bit. So it's interesting that there's something must be going on with like coordinating these complex development that actually requires electrical sensitivity. Otherwise, I don't think biology would do that.
Yeah, super interesting.
I know.
A quick aside there is that this goes to Michael Levin's work on the morphogenetic fields and the bioelectric code is what he calls it for development and for regeneration and even oncology. So really interesting stuff. Sorry, Jim, back to you.
The interesting thing, or the question I'm trying to ask here on some level, is not just about electrical conductance, but why a 1 cycle a second system, a 10 cycle a second system, and a 15 cycle a system will be propagated to the scalp, where for some reason 8 cycles per second isn't. And there seems to be something very specific about the theta of REMs and why we cannot pick it up on the scalp. And so that's the paradox to me of REM sleep. Now if you look at theta, it's not just associated with REM sleep. You'll get changes in theta with meditation. So you'll get the ratio between theta and alpha altered in long-term meditators. So it has a role that will be there as well. And the other component of REM sleep is it's the stage in which you will see beta or gamma in sleep, but you won't see it in a EEG that we do in the sleep lab. You'll see it in a quantitative EEG analysis system where you can get a spike in that area. And there have been people who have associated gamma occurring with lucidity. The lucid dream studies are all over the place. There's lucidity can happen in sleep onset as well as in REM sleep. 17% of Labarge's people have lucid dreaming at sleep onset, which is definitely not REMs. They've not looked at gamma associated with it in that state. And also you get gamma changes as well. It's typically associated with long-term meditators as well. And we'll get to my favorite stage, which is delta. You know, I love delta sleep. I think it particularly because Koch and others have, Tenori, et cetera, have leaned so hard about dreamless sleep, where this is the most exciting dreams you will ever get are from deep sleep. And so this is your night terror. This is your somnambulism. These are, you get incredible autonomic changes on waking, people distressed, disorganized, confused. The dreams of deep sleep are, they don't have the long story of REMs. But if you wake people who wake from the parasomnias of deep sleep, sleepwalking, the night terror, the confusional arousal, you'll get a dream report almost half the time. And often is of extreme emotion. In working with filmmakers, it's been kind of fun to realize that so many of them will remember and use a deep sleep parasomnia dream in their work years later. I have a friend who's named Bob Benedecki, who's a playwright, and he did he wrote a play of Kafka's Metamorphosis, but it was a story of that he had the crowd actually enter the stage where you went through in small groups and you entered a constantly changing stage that you experienced, and it became quite famous. He won awards, and it's, if you ever get a chance to see such this play put on, I think it's called Kafka. It's really worthwhile, and Bob reports that when he was a child, that he would have these dreams, that he lived in Chicago, and he would walk across the street and go into one of these doors in a building that were one of these spinning glass doors that you go in a circle and come out the other side. And he would enter this door and it would start to spin him in circles. And he had this dream over and over when he was a child, and each time would come out at a different place. And of course, part of the experience when he was a child, that he was living in a house with grandparents, and he would find himself awake in a different part of the house. So it was definitely a deep sleep somnambulism dream. So these are incredibly powerful dreams, and they're about a state of consciousness, the 1 cycle a second events that you don't see in waking. This is something that is a state of consciousness that is so very different than the frequencies that we're interacting with in wake. And these are, for me, the most exciting of dreams for a lot of people.
And Jim, I'm curious about this on a personal level. I've had a few night terrors during my life, and they've actually been clustered in time. I'm curious if you could explain the physiology of night terrors.
Well, these are deep sleep events. They're abrupt arousals out of deep sleep, and they occur most commonly in young folks. And in other words, when I get people coming in with night terrors as a complaint, it's almost always the parent. The parent is scared to death. Their kid wakes up, his face is red, his eyes are dilated, he's scared to death that something's after him. And so it's the parent that's upset. Most of these go away, except on rare occasions with adolescents. So it's about 4 to 6% of the population will have these experiences, either somnambulism, a night terror, confusional arousal. But then in adulthood, they become quite rare, except in the psychiatric population. So you can still find them in psych hospitals. In particular, you can pick up people who have deep sleep parasomnias. As to what else they reflect, or why they wake some people up and not others. I don't think anyone knows. We've only just been able to get people to admit in the last 4 or 5 years that these, because it was in the literature, that these things don't have dreams attached to them. And it's so hard to get an untruth out of the literature, is just, it just persists and persists and persists. So in other words, they're extraordinarily hard to study. You don't see them in the lab. People very rarely have ever have night terrors or any parasomnia in the sleep lab.
Thanks.
The other that I just added on, because there's some confusion or question about subdelta. I mean, we did not, in the sleep lab, you don't see subdelta. We don't do quantitative EEG analysis, and you don't see it on a normal sleep study. So basically, this has only been picked up in the last 30 years. We didn't know about it before then, and it's associated with waking mind wandering. Domhoff and some others have been really pushing that it's also associated with REM dreaming. But there is this much slower frequency that's apparent during waking analysis when people are in non-attentive periods, and you'll see subdelta frequencies. So basically the end of this little presentation, that the way we diagnose the stages of sleep is based on their electrophysiologic rhythm. That's the 4 stages of sleep. They all have a set frequency, and they have, each dream type is associated with a set frequency. And I think if I can ask each of you to think back about the dreams that you've had, and most people, after thinking about it, realize that they have different kinds of dreams as well. They have these different states of consciousness that are based on different electrophysiologic states in their brain. Now, I keep trying to get people fascinated by this. I mean, people seem quite willing to go out and take a drug to reach a different state of consciousness. And I keep saying, well, you've got all these other states of consciousness that are available to you. I mean, people meditate all the time to get to these other states of consciousness. So why are people not interested in the fact that they have different states of consciousness in their sleep that describe different systems operative in their brain? It seems quite interesting to me, but I'm weird. The other comments is that REMS is neither non-synchronous nor paradoxical. It's a synchronous state characterized by theta and beta frequency that are not apparent for some reason on the scalp EEG. And finally, that the synchronous CNS electromagnetic fields are a primary attribute of the conscious states of sleep. So that's my little presentation.
Great, thank you, Jim. Really cool stuff. Questions, comments?
Yeah, Jim, could you speak to the sort of causal role that you think the electrical fields may play in consciousness? Do you think that they are correlates of consciousness, or do you entertain the possibility that they could, the electrical fields could themselves be the foundation for consciousness?
I'm a particle wave guy, and I tend to look at what we've studied to this point with neuroanatomy as particles, and that there is a wave system that's just as powerful and functional that we understand almost nothing of. That the consciousness is an interactive interface between electrophysiology and neuroanatomy.
Can I follow up on that, Jonathan? Are you finished?
Yeah.
Right. Could you flesh it out, Jim? It's super intriguing to me, and like I'm certainly from what I understand you're saying, I'm of a similar view. And it seems to me that it's likely there's kind of a gestalt where there is a multi-level causal hierarchy here, where neuroanatomy produces the fields, but the fields then have an influence back on neuroanatomy. So it's kind of a circular causal chain where the whole thing is required for the phenomenon of consciousness. Would you agree with that kind of general modeling? And if so, do you see the global electric field as supervening on, but in some manner independent from the neuroanatomy?
The way that I've been looking at it, or where I've ended up, is a kind of idea that the electrical fields are cellularly produced. They're not produced by a neural network. I think the fields we know come from, most likely come from a frequency-based production in neural cells, and are projected throughout the system and affect the tendencies of neurons to fire and affect neural networks as far as constructs. But I think the system operates outside the neural network as well, between cells and other cells, between and internally within the cells, probably to affect interactions with memory systems and DNA, etc. along that line. So I think basically we've spent a huge amount of effort and energy understanding the digital network of cellular interconnections, where we're looking at an analog system of waves that is operating independently and yet integrates with the neuroanatomy.
So would you agree it's based on the neuroanatomy, but then can influence back on the neuroanatomy? Is that what you're saying, or is it?
There's no question that they interact. There's no question that the waves affect the tendency of cells to fire, okay? And where you are in a frequency system. But I've still not been able to understand how neurocells firing produce waveforms. This idea that Koch and Buzinski have put out that the waveforms form from all the electrical fields integrating in the brain, that you have a wave. I think they're avoiding the issue. This is the waveforms are not produced by spikes. You've got waveforms that are produced as an independent analog phenomenon from, and the cells are firing in a digital manner that are affected by these wave fields, but they're not creating these wave fields.
That's super interesting. I'm curious, Colin, if you want to chime in on that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Wow, yeah, I've got my knowledge of the production of the field system is so large that I have trouble projecting myself into the particular topic. You know, what it looks like when it comes out and hits skin. I have difficulty understanding how you could have any field in the absence of any spiking. That would attest to some other excitatory or source system, which I'm not aware of. I don't have I can see the emergent qualities of the field system doing the things that you want, and that it all originates in the membrane. The whole thing comes from the membrane. My research at the moment is actually building an inorganic version of that, the basic intrinsic generator of the origins of it all. And I'll hopefully be able to say a little more in due course when we actually do some measurements and publish it a bit. Beyond that, the topic is too big for me to talk about quickly. But if you took away the membrane, stopped all that activity, you'd have no field at all. That would be death. But that doesn't mean that there aren't incredibly complex emergent properties in the summation of all of these intricate additive processes that come from the intricacies of the structure of the network. the simple stuff that comes out the scalp is just the top of it's a massive iceberg of intricate resonances going down into the megahertz, down at the level of the ion channels, where the timescales are of the order of microseconds. So,
And even terahertz at the microtubular level on other proteins.
the bandwidth is enormous. The question of whether the functional relevance is the main one. The terahertz waves get absorbed so quickly, they don't radiate anywhere much. They don't actually do anything. But what is it like to be terahertz waves? Well, let's find out.
The fact that the system can eliminate waves, can absorb waves, brings up the question of whether it can create waves. In other words, can it go in both directions? Can you systems in the pyramidal cells act as antennas, taking nano anatomy, distant wave systems, and projecting them into a physiological area.
Nikki, go ahead.
Really interesting talk. Thanks so much, Jim. Quick question. So it looks like there's some pretty interesting studies that have been published relatively recently. So like 2019 and 2020 by Yoon and Drews, for example, about co-sleeping couples and synchronization between sleep stage as well as heart rhythms. I didn't know if you'd looked into that at all in terms of interpersonal neural synchrony, between people.
It's not really my area. There's been a lot of reports of what people are putting a lot of energy into right now is the concept of how humans sleep normally. In other words, if you take away the clock, that people used to have and people have gone back and studied the literature to suggest that before we came to an age where we were on such a schedule, and people did not have clocks, that people had a biphasic sleep period that altered with light, is that it wasn't a purely day-night circadian pattern, but people would fall asleep together and then wake in the middle of the night. And that's when most of the babies were made, that people were would wake up for a period and then go back to sleep together. The whole idea of co-sleeping is has been such a bugaboo because of the bugaboo of SIDS and how co-sleeping supposedly killed children. And there was evidently a pattern of behavior that went on in the dark ages up to our present time, where this is one way you got rid of too many children. So that's been the consideration, that co-sleeping with a child was dangerous in some ways. But the whole SIDS thing was such a mess with flopping everybody on their stomach in America to quit reflux, and the guys who pushed that killed thousands of children.
Wow. Well, Jim, back in your question.
And Tam, I saw your comment.
Go ahead, Nikki.
I'll throw some of the studies to the chat. Yeah,
okay, great.
I can do that.
So Jim, on your general question to the group about why you don't see theta and beta make it to Scalp EEG, just pursuing this idea a little further of coupling and cross-frequency coupling being a really important causal mechanism for consciousness. Is it possible that these wavelengths propagate subcortically, and because they're subcortical, they don't actually connect the whole brain consciousness to motor center and sensory centers, and therefore you have basically the imaginal parts of the brain going ahead doing their thing and creating these really vivid dream states, but of course not having motor or sensory connections, you're not actually awake. Could that be, the evolutionary pathway here? And it does leave still the mystery of why they don't physiologically propagate to the scalp, but could that be kind of the reason, quote unquote, they don't propagate in that manner?
And that fits with the Freudian idea and Hobson's idea of taking the Freudian concept of the id and applying it to REMs. And that basically what you're seeing is the unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And so this has been for years the question of that was so many Freuds considered REMs the smoking gun, the proof of the dream from the primitive mind coming and controlling the creativity of the waking consciousness.
Mm-hmm. And a related question on anesthesia. This year's Tucson, we had a lot of talks on anesthesia, which is obviously related to, but quite different than dream and sleeping states. It seems to me, what little I know, the mechanisms of anesthesia are quite different than the mechanisms of sleep. Could you speak to that a bit? Have you studied anesthesia very much?
Well, the way that people explain anesthesia and are still explaining it based on this year's conference is basically slowing of the EEG, that these drugs, at least some of them, not ketamine, but the propofol and the inhaled agents and the narcotics, you basically slow the EEG down from a faster frequency to a slower frequency. You reduce, quote unquote, the activation of the brain, and you produce a global state of unconsciousness as far as reaction to the environment. So that is not what you see with sleep. So it's a very different state, and where the blocks are occurring with anesthesia, I'm not exactly sure where it's happening.
Thank you. Anyone else? Questions, comments?
Hi, Jim. I loved your presentation. Thank you so much. I have a couple questions for you. Are numinous dreams occurring in the delta? And do we have the ability to induce numinous dreams to access the different states of consciousness and messages from the unconscious and symbolism so that we can expand our creative processes and psychological catharsis?
I've never heard of lucid dreams occurring in deep sleep. We do have clearly the ability to, the most accessible dream state is the stage 1, is a sleep onset. So there's no question that an individual can easily learn. I mean, the Romantic poets did this, Yeats, and as I described, some of the painters doing it. REM sleep and the ability to control dreams and access REMs during REMs is possible. We teach people to do that. We teach PTSD patients to control their nightmares on a regular basis. Now, and there's a lot of people that feel like that the ability when you can assume a level of dream control where you can access that dream consciously while asleep will allow you to have access that produces a more intense dream experience. However, there's also the argument that that controlling dreams, you take out their internal unconscious message capability.
Right.
So you exert control, and whatever there was wonderful about the dream, you don't get because I've accused Labarge of being a dream Nazi. So he's not satisfied with controlling his waking. He wants to control his sleep as well.
what is the process that you take individuals who are experiencing PTSD through to change their nightmares?
It's a meditative. I get them to describe their nightmare. It's basically it works best for children because often they have a picture of a monster.
Yes.
And so what you do is you work with them to say, well, give me another way that this could be, another ending. And you get the child, and the child draws a different kind of monster, or he draws a bear in a field of flowers, and you have them put that drawing by their bed and think about it before they go to bed at night.
I love that.
And basically, you can use that kind of training to reduce nightmares for someone with PTSD about 80% of the time, as far as reducing the nightmares. It works quite well, but there are other approaches that work well with, traumatic exposure works well, which is a totally different approach. Less focus on what you went through, and that'll get rid of the nightmares, as well as EMDR. So all those three approaches work really well for getting rid of nightmares and PTSD.
Thank you. I like the bear in the field of flowers. I like that.
It's not
Thank
a
you.
terror, but
Thanks. Anyone else? Great. Well, thanks so much, Jim. Really interesting stuff. Look forward to your book. So just a final thing, you working on this book where you're going to flesh out your brainwave theory of consciousness. Do you have a time frame for when it will be released?
oh yeah, I'm about halfway through, so it's at least another year off. So
Looking forward to it.
if
Thanks,
I live that long, that's always the
Oh,
question.
fingers crossed. Talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
On behalf of the entire General Resonance Theory team, I'd like to thank you for watching. Don't forget to like this video, share it, add a comment, and subscribe for more content. We'll see you next time.